At exactly 2:17 a.m., on a quiet Wednesday morning in the small suburban town of Westbridge, Ohio, a 911 dispatcher received a phone call that would later be replayed in courtrooms, documentaries, and living rooms across America for years to come. On the line was a man who sounded shaken, breathless, and confused, as though he had just woken up from a nightmare he could not escape. His voice trembled as he said, I think my wife is dead. She's not breathing. There's blood. I don't know what happened." In the background, there was an eerie silence, broken only by his uneven breathing and the faint hum of a refrigerator. No screaming, no frantic sobbing, no desperate pleading for help. Just a strangely controlled panic that would later make investigators pause and ask themselves a chilling question. Was this the voice of a grieving husband, or the carefully rehearsed performance of a man who already knew exactly what had happened? By the time paramedics arrived at the modest two-story home on Willow Creek Drive, flashing red and blue lights, washing over neatly trimmed lawns, and sleeping neighbors' windows, Emily Hartley was already gone. She lay in the master bedroom, her body partially covered by a blanket, her face pale, her eyes closed as though she had simply drifted off to sleep. But the scene told a different story. There were bruises on her arms, a deep wound near her temple, blood stains on the carpet that had been hastily wiped but not completely erased. And beside the bed stood her husband, Daniel Hartley, wearing wrinkled sweatpants and a t-shirt, his hands shaking as he clutched a mug of cold coffee he had poured himself while waiting for police to arrive. He kept repeating the same sentence over and over again. "I don't know what happened. I swear I don't know." In that moment, to the neighbors watching from behind their curtains, and to the officers who had seen countless tragic scenes before, it looked like yet another heartbreaking case of a woman who had died suddenly in her own home. A terrible accident, a possible intruder, a medical emergency gone wrong. Anything but what it would soon become. Because within weeks, detectives would uncover a trail of lies, financial secrets, and digital footprints that would point in one terrifying direction. And at the center of it all stood the man who had promised to love her forever. Before we go any further, if you appreciate deeply researched, emotionally powerful true crime stories that uncover the truth behind the headlines, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue bringing you stories that matter, stories that honor victims, and stories that demand justice. Now, let's go back to the beginning, because nothing about this case makes sense unless you understand who Emily and Daniel really were. Emily Hartley was known in Westbridge as the kind of person everyone trusted. She worked as a pediatric nurse at the county hospital, often staying late to comfort anxious parents or hold the hands of frightened children before surgery. She volunteered at church events. She baked cupcakes for neighbors' birthdays. She remembered everyone's names. Friends described her as gentle, optimistic, and deeply loyal, sometimes to a fault. When she married Daniel at 26, many believed she had found her perfect match. Daniel, on the surface, seemed equally admirable. He worked in sales for a regional insurance company, drove a clean black sedan, and dressed sharply even on weekends. He was charming, confident, and knew exactly how to make a good impression. At social gatherings, he was the man telling jokes, buying drinks, and talking about big plans for the future. He and Emily appeared inseparable on social media. Their Instagram was filled with smiling selfies, anniversary dinners, and captions about forever and soulmates. To the outside world, they were the definition of a modern American success story. But behind closed doors, cracks had begun to form long before Emily's death. Friends later revealed that Emily had started confiding in them about problems in her marriage nearly a year earlier. Daniel had become controlling. He questioned where she went. He checked her phone. He criticized her spending, even though she earned good money. Arguments became more frequent. Sometimes he would disappear for hours without explanation. Other times, he would shower her with affection, gifts, and apologies, promising he would change. Psychologists often describe this pattern as emotional manipulation, tension, conflict, apology, reconciliation, and then repetition. And Emily, like many victims, believed each apology meant something. She believed love could fix everything. What she did not know was that while she was trying to save their marriage, Daniel was quietly preparing for something else entirely. 3 months before her death, Daniel took out a new life insurance policy on Emily. At first glance, this was not unusual. Many couples do it. Financial advisors even recommend it. But this policy was different. It was worth $1.8 million. And Daniel was listed as the sole beneficiary. When the insurance company agent later testified, he revealed something chilling. Daniel had been unusually insistent. He asked detailed questions about payout timelines. He wanted to know how quickly money could be released after a death. He asked what types of deaths qualified: accidents, illness, unexpected incidents. At the time, no one thought much of it. After all, he worked in insurance. He understood the system. He was just being thorough. Or so it seemed. On the night Emily died, Daniel told police a simple story. He said they had gone to bed around 10:30 p.m. after watching television. He claimed they had not argued. He said Emily complained of a headache and went to sleep early. He stayed up scrolling through his phone and fell asleep on the couch. Around 2 a.m., he said he returned to the bedroom and found her unresponsive. Panicked, he called 911. A tragic accident. An unfortunate coincidence. A husband in shock. But almost immediately, detectives noticed inconsistencies. For one thing, neighbors reported hearing raised voices around midnight. A loud argument. A door slamming. Something falling. For another, phone records showed Daniel was active on his phone at 1:48 a.m., just minutes before he claimed to have discovered Emily's body. He had been searching something online. What happens if someone dies in their sleep? That search alone raised eyebrows. But it was only the beginning. When forensic analysts examined the bedroom, they found signs of a struggle that had been partially cleaned. A broken lamp hidden in the trash. Blood wiped from a bedside table. Fibers under Emily's fingernails that matched Daniel's shirt. Still, none of this proved murder. Not yet. Daniel, meanwhile, began behaving in ways that unsettled everyone around him. Less than a week after Emily's funeral, he contacted the insurance company. He asked about paperwork. He asked about timelines. He asked when he could expect payment. He sold Emily's car. He listed the house for sale. He stopped attending church. He stopped answering calls from her family. And then came the discovery that changed everything. A detective reviewing Daniel's laptop found a hidden folder. Inside were dozens of documents: financial projections, debt spreadsheets, credit card statements, and personal notes. Daniel was drowning in debt, gambling losses, failed investments, secret loans. He owed more than $400,000, and creditors were closing in fast. To investigators, a terrifying possibility emerged. Had Daniel seen Emily not as his wife, but as his way out? Had he calculated her death as a financial solution? But before they could confront him, something unexpected happened. Daniel hired a lawyer, and he stopped talking. Suddenly, the cooperative widower became silent. Interviews were canceled. Messages went unanswered. His social media went dark. And when detectives finally subpoenaed his phone records, they found something that made the entire case explode. On the night Emily died, Daniel had exchanged several messages with an unknown number. The last message, sent at 1:52 a.m., read, "It's done. Call me tomorrow." Who was he talking to? What was done? And why had he sent it just minutes before calling 911? Those questions would lead investigators down a path involving secret relationships, staged scenes, and a betrayal so cold that even seasoned detectives struggled to comprehend it. But the most disturbing revelation was still waiting to be uncovered. Because buried deep in Daniel's digital history was evidence that suggested Emily's death may not have been spontaneous at all. It may have been planned for months. If this story is already making you question everything you thought you knew about trust and love, please remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your engagement helps keep these stories alive and ensures that victims like Emily are never forgotten. In the weeks following Emily Hartley's funeral, the town of Westbridge slowly attempted to return to normal, yet beneath the surface of everyday routines, an invisible tension continued to grow as whispers spread through neighborhoods, workplaces, and church halls, fueled by the uncomfortable realization that something about her death simply did not feel right. Although Daniel presented himself publicly as a grieving husband overwhelmed by loss, his behavior behind closed doors began to reveal subtle inconsistencies that quietly unsettled those who knew the couple best. Friends noticed that he spoke more about insurance paperwork than about Emily herself, that he seemed strangely focused on financial logistics rather than emotional healing, and that his grief appeared carefully performed rather than naturally expressed, as though he were playing a role he had rehearsed rather than responding to genuine heartbreak. Investigators, meanwhile, were beginning to assemble a more complex portrait of the Hartley marriage, one that contrasted sharply with the image of stability Daniel had presented to the world. Through interviews with close friends and co-workers, detectives learned that Emily had confided in several people about mounting financial stress, recurring arguments over money, and Daniel's increasing emotional distance in the months leading up to her death. She had spoken about his late nights, unexplained absences, and frequent phone privacy, often dismissing her own concerns by insisting that stress was simply changing him temporarily. This pattern, common in many troubled relationships, would later emerge as a critical psychological indicator, revealing how Emily had gradually normalized behaviors that were quietly eroding her safety. As financial records were examined, investigators uncovered a troubling reality hidden beneath Daniel's carefully maintained image of middle-class stability. Credit card balances had reached alarming levels, loans had been taken out without Emily's knowledge, and multiple business ventures had failed, leaving Daniel trapped in a cycle of debt that grew more suffocating with each passing month. More disturbingly, they discovered that only 6 months before Emily's death, Daniel had significantly increased her life insurance policy, citing long-term family security as his justification, despite the fact that the couple had no children and had previously struggled to afford basic expenses. At the time, Emily had reportedly questioned the decision, but Daniel had reassured her with practiced charm, framing it as an act of love rather than a calculated investment. While financial pressure mounted, another hidden layer of Daniel's life began to surface through digital forensics. Investigators uncovered hundreds of deleted messages exchanged between Daniel and Rachel Monroe, a co-worker from a nearby town whom Emily had never met. These conversations, reconstructed through backup servers and partial device recovery, revealed a relationship that had evolved from professional collaboration into emotional dependency and eventually into an affair rooted in shared resentment toward Emily and shared fantasies of escape. In their messages, Daniel frequently portrayed himself as a victim trapped in unloving marriage, exaggerating conflicts and fabricating emotional neglect, while Rachel encouraged his narrative, unknowingly reinforcing a worldview in which Emily had become the obstacle standing between Daniel and happiness. Psychological experts would later describe this dynamic as emotional rehearsal, a process through which individuals mentally prepare for abandonment or betrayal long before it occurs physically. By repeatedly framing himself as oppressed and misunderstood, Daniel gradually justified his growing detachment and cultivated a sense of entitlement that would prove devastating. His messages shifted over time from frustration to bitterness, from longing to resentment, and finally to alarming expressions of desire for freedom at any cost, language that investigators initially dismissed as emotional exaggeration until later evidence forced them to reconsider its meaning. The investigation took a darker turn when analysts examined Daniel's internet search history, which revealed patterns that could no longer be explained by curiosity or anxiety. In the months leading up to Emily's death, he had searched for information on life insurance payout timelines, undetectable poisons, methods of suffocation, and crime scene cleanup techniques. Although defense attorneys would later argue that these searches reflected stress-induced paranoia, detectives recognized a more troubling pattern, a gradual progression from financial inquiry to violent possibility, suggesting a mind increasingly occupied with irreversible solutions. Despite these discoveries, Daniel continued to maintain his public persona of grief, attending community gatherings, posting emotional tributes online, and cooperating politely with investigators, all while carefully omitting details that might compromise his narrative. His performance was so convincing that several friends initially defended him fiercely, dismissing suspicions as cruel gossip directed at a man who had already lost everything. This social shield delayed deeper scrutiny and allowed Daniel to remain free while investigators quietly worked behind the scenes to close the evidentiary gaps. The breakthrough came when forensic analysts recovered fragments of a voice memo Daniel had attempted to delete on the night of Emily's death. Though partially corrupted, advanced recovery techniques restored enough audio to reveal a chilling monologue recorded shortly after the incident. In it, Daniel could be heard speaking in a subdued, yet disturbingly calm tone, referencing starting over, being free, and not having to worry anymore, language that bore no resemblance to shock or grief. The recording suggested not confusion, but emotional release, a psychological slip that exposed his internal reality at the very moment he believed he was alone. Simultaneously, crime scene reconstruction experts began to challenge Daniel's account of Emily's final moments. His claim that she had collapsed during an argument did not align with blood spatter patterns, injury distribution, or furniture displacement. Instead, the evidence indicated a prolonged physical struggle that had moved through multiple rooms, contradicting his narrative of sudden tragedy. These inconsistencies transformed suspicion into probable cause, allowing investigators to confront Daniel with facts he could no longer manipulate. During his second major interrogation, Daniel's composure finally cracked. Faced with timelines, messages, and forensic contradictions, he became evasive, contradicting himself repeatedly and displaying flashes of anger when challenged. Although he stopped short of confession, his shifting stories provided prosecutors with the final pieces needed to establish intent, preparation, and consciousness of guilt. Within days, he was formally arrested and charged with first-degree murder and insurance fraud. Yet even after his arrest, many questions remained unanswered, particularly concerning how deeply premeditated his actions truly were and whether he had ever hesitated before crossing the final line. As the case moved toward trial, prosecutors prepared to expose not only the evidence of murder, but the psychological journey that had transformed a struggling husband into a calculating killer. If this story has made you reflect on how hidden pressures can lead to devastating consequences, please remember to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments, because your support helps bring these stories to light and keeps conversations about truth and accountability alive. When the trial of Daniel Hartley finally began nearly 2 years after Emily's death, the quiet courthouse in Westbridge was transformed into a national spectacle that reflected not only the gravity of the crime, but also the collective hunger for answers that had been building in the hearts of millions who had followed the case from afar. Long before sunrise, television vans lined the narrow streets, journalists rehearsed their opening reports, and anxious spectators waited outside the courthouse doors, hoping to witness the moment when a man who had once been seen as a devoted husband would finally be forced to confront the truth he had spent so long trying to bury. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was heavy with tension, grief, and expectation, as Emily's parents clutched framed photographs of their daughter. While Daniel sat beside his attorneys, dressed in a dark suit, his expression carefully neutral, as though he still believed he could outthink the evidence that had been assembled against him. From the opening statements, it became clear that this trial would not revolve around sympathy or emotional manipulation, but around a detailed psychological and financial roadmap that prosecutors had spent months constructing. The lead prosecutor spoke with deliberate calm, guiding the jury through Daniel's mounting debts, his secret relationship with Rachel, his calculated increase of Emily's life insurance policy, and his gradual emotional withdrawal from his marriage, explaining how these elements were not random occurrences, but interconnected steps in a long-term plan driven by desperation and entitlement. He emphasized that this was not a spontaneous act of violence, nor a tragic accident fueled by temporary anger, but the final execution of a decision that had been rehearsed in Daniel's mind for months, perhaps even years, as he searched for a way out of his financial collapse without sacrificing his lifestyle or public image. In contrast, the defense attempted to paint a portrait of Daniel as a man crushed by pressure, a husband who had lost control in a moment of weakness and panic, and who now stood accused of premeditation based on what they claimed were misunderstandings and coincidences. They argued that financial stress had clouded his judgment, that his messages to Rachel were emotional exaggerations, and that his online searches reflected anxiety rather than intent, insisting that Emily's death was the tragic result of an argument that spiraled beyond control. Yet even as they spoke, their words seemed fragile when weighed against the mountain of digital, financial, and forensic evidence that loomed over the courtroom. The prosecution's case gained unstoppable momentum when the medical examiner took the stand and calmly dismantled any remaining illusion of accident or impulsive violence. With methodical precision, she explained how Emily's injuries revealed a prolonged struggle, describing the bruising patterns, the internal trauma, and the defensive wounds that indicated repeated attempts to escape. She walked the jury through each injury, illustrating how the sequence of harm could only have occurred through sustained, deliberate force applied by someone standing inches away, someone who knew her movements, her habits, and her vulnerabilities. As she spoke, jurors leaned forward, some visibly trembling, as they realized that Emily had not died quickly nor quietly, but after fighting desperately for her life against the person she trusted most. The digital forensic analysts followed, reconstructing Daniel's actions on the night of the murder with devastating clarity. Using synchronized timelines projected onto large screens, they showed how Daniel had disabled location tracking, deleted key messages, conducted late-night searches on erasing evidence, and resumed normal phone activity within hours, creating the illusion of routine. Each digital footprint contradicted his claims of confusion and shock, revealing instead a mind that remained disturbingly organized even in the aftermath of violence. Investigators demonstrated how he had contacted Rachel shortly after Emily's death, not in despair, but with a message that suggested relief and finality, a detail that quietly reshaped how the jury perceived every previous statement he had made. When Rachel Monroe took the stand, the courtroom witnessed a different kind of tragedy, one rooted in regret and moral reckoning rather than legal guilt. She admitted through tears that she had ignored warning signs because she wanted to believe Daniel's narrative of victimhood, that she had convinced herself she was helping a man escape emotional abuse rather than enabling a future murderer. She described their conversations, his gradual shift from frustration to bitterness, and the moment she realized, too late, that his fantasies of escape were becoming something far more dangerous. When prosecutors played the voicemail in which Daniel declared, "It worked. I'm free now," the courtroom fell into stunned silence as the casual cruelty of the statement exposed a truth no lawyer could soften. Psychological experts later contextualized Daniel's behavior within patterns commonly seen in financially motivated domestic homicide cases, explaining how long-term resentment, perceived entitlement, and secret relationships often combine to create what they described as a psychological exit strategy, in which the offender emotionally abandons the relationship long before physically destroying it. They detailed how Daniel's increasing isolation, fixation on money, and self-victimizing language indicated a mindset in which he no longer viewed Emily as a partner, but as an obstacle, a liability standing between him and financial freedom. Their analysis revealed that his actions were not impulsive eruptions, but the final stage of a mental process in which moral boundaries had gradually eroded. Against his attorney's advice, Daniel chose to testify, convinced that his charm and intelligence could still sway the jury. At first, he spoke calmly, describing his love for Emily, his struggles, and his claimed regret, attempting to present himself as a man crushed by tragedy rather than responsible for it. However, under cross-examination, his carefully constructed persona began to fracture as prosecutors confronted him with inconsistencies, deleted messages, and financial records. Each question forced him deeper into contradiction, until his tone shifted from controlled to defensive, from sorrowful to resentful, revealing flashes of the bitterness that had fueled his actions. The moment that altered the trial occurred when Daniel, frustrated and cornered, suggested that Emily had pushed him too far, implying that her expectations and concerns had contributed to his breakdown. In that instant, the mask fully collapsed, exposing not a remorseful widower, but a man still unwilling to accept responsibility for the life he had destroyed. The courtroom reacted visibly, with murmurs spreading through the audience as jurors exchanged uneasy glances, recognizing that they were witnessing not a confession, but a revelation of character. Closing arguments became less about speculation and more about synthesis, as prosecutors carefully reassembled the story from motive to aftermath, demonstrating how every piece of evidence fit into a coherent narrative of calculated betrayal. They replayed the voicemail, displayed the financial spreadsheets, highlighted the digital deletions, and asked the jury a question that lingered in the air long after they finished speaking. If this was an accident, why was every step prepared in advance? The defense, by contrast, could only appeal to doubt and emotion, urging jurors to consider mercy in a case where evidence had already spoken with overwhelming clarity. After hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict that would reshape Westbridge forever. Yet the most haunting chapter of this story was still ahead, because Daniel had not yet spoken his final words to the court, and Emily's family had not yet confronted the man who had taken her life. If this story has affected you and reminded you of how betrayal can hide behind familiar faces, please remember to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments, because your support helps bring these important stories to light and keeps the search for truth alive. When Daniel Hartley returned to the courtroom for sentencing, nearly 3 years had passed since the night Emily lost her life, yet the emotional weight of her absence had only grown heavier with time, settling permanently into the hearts of her family, friends, and the community that had once celebrated her kindness and quiet resilience. The courtroom that morning was filled long before proceedings began, with reporters lining the walls, victims' advocates occupying reserved benches, and residents of Westbridge gathering silently, united by a shared desire to witness the final chapter of a tragedy that had reshaped their town. Daniel entered in prison attire, stripped of the tailored suits and polished appearance he had worn during trial, and for the first time, he looked less like a confident professional and more like a man confronting the irreversible consequences of his choices. Before the judge delivered the sentence, Emily's family was invited to present victim impact statements, and it was in these moments that the abstract language of legal proceedings gave way to raw human grief. Emily's mother spoke first, her voice trembling as she described the empty chair at family dinners, the unanswered phone calls, and the birthdays that would forever pass without her daughter's laughter. She spoke not with hatred, but with devastating honesty about the daily pain of knowing that Emily's life had been reduced to evidence files and court transcripts. Her father followed, recounting memories of teaching Emily to ride a bike, helping her with homework, and watching her grow into a woman who believed deeply in loyalty and forgiveness, values that had ultimately made her vulnerable to betrayal. Each word landed heavily in the courtroom, reminding everyone present that this case was not about statistics or headlines, but about a life violently erased. Friends and co-workers then took the stand, painting a portrait of Emily as a woman who supported others even when she herself was struggling, who volunteered at shelters, who stayed late to help colleagues, and who always believed that problems could be solved through patience and understanding. Their testimonies revealed how completely Daniel's actions had shattered not only a marriage, but an entire network of relationships built on trust and mutual respect. As these voices filled the courtroom, Daniel remained silent, staring forward, his expression unreadable, as though distancing himself emotionally from the devastation surrounding him. When it was finally his turn to speak, Daniel stood slowly, his hands trembling slightly as he addressed the court. He offered a carefully worded statement expressing regret for the pain caused, without directly acknowledging responsibility for Emily's death, framing his actions as the result of stress and poor judgment rather than deliberate choice. To many in the room, his words felt hollow, lacking the accountability that true remorse requires, reinforcing the perception that even now, he was more focused on protecting his self-image than confronting the reality of what he had done. Psychological experts observing the case would later describe this as consistent with individuals who compartmentalize guilt in order to preserve their internal narrative of victimhood. The judge's sentencing remarks were measured yet uncompromising, reflecting both legal rigor and moral clarity. He spoke of how Daniel had systematically dismantled the trust at the foundation of his marriage, how he had exploited financial instruments meant to protect families, and how he had attempted to manipulate investigators and loved ones in the aftermath of violence. He emphasized that society depends on the sanctity of intimate relationships, and that crimes committed within them represent a profound breach of human responsibility. With these words, he sentenced Daniel to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, ensuring that he would never again walk free in the community he had betrayed. Outside the courthouse, Emily's family addressed reporters for the final time, expressing gratitude to investigators, prosecutors, and supporters who had stood with them throughout the ordeal. Yet they also acknowledged that justice, while necessary, could never restore what had been lost. They announced the creation of a foundation in Emily's name dedicated to supporting victims of domestic financial abuse and emotional manipulation, transforming their grief into advocacy and education. Through this work, they sought to honor Emily's memory by helping others recognize warning signs before tragedy strikes. In the years that followed, the Hartley case became a reference point in criminal psychology and domestic violence research, cited in academic studies examining how financial desperation, emotional detachment, and entitlement can converge into lethal outcomes. Law enforcement agencies incorporated lessons from the investigation into training programs, emphasizing the importance of digital forensics, behavioral analysis, and early intervention. Emily's story thus continued to shape systems designed to protect others, ensuring that her life would not be remembered solely for how it ended, but for the impact it had after her death. Yet perhaps the most enduring legacy of the case lay in the conversations it sparked within families, workplaces, and communities across the country, encouraging people to look more closely at relationships that appear stable on the surface, to take emotional distress seriously, and to seek help before resentment hardens into violence. Survivors of similar situations began sharing their experiences, finding courage in Emily's story, and recognizing that silence and endurance are not substitutes for safety and dignity. Today, Westbridge remains a quiet town, its streets unchanged, its routines restored, yet beneath that normalcy lies a collective memory of betrayal and loss that continues to shape its identity. Residents still speak of Emily with affection and respect, remembering her generosity, her patience, and her belief in second chances, even as they acknowledge that some people misuse that trust in unforgivable ways. Her story serves as both a warning and a call to compassion, reminding us that behind closed doors, struggles often unfold unseen, and that vigilance, empathy, and accountability are essential to preventing similar tragedies. As this series comes to an end, we are left not only with the story of a crime, but with a deeper understanding of how human choices, shaped by pressure and selfishness, can destroy lives, and how courage, perseverance, and truth can ultimately prevail. If this journey has moved you, challenged you, or helped you see these issues more clearly, please remember to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments, because your engagement supports the telling of stories that matter and helps ensure that voices like Emily's are never forgotten.